An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth by Chris Hadfield. Picture yourself floating in the infinite silence of space. Below you, Earth glows like a precious blue jewel suspended in darkness. You're on a spacewalk, the moment you've been dreaming about since you were a kid. This is it, the absolute peak of human achievement. And then everything goes sideways. A microscopic droplet, part soap, part your own tears, sneaks into your eye. The pain hits like a lightning bolt. You're suddenly blind. Every fiber of your being wants to rub that eye, but your hand just bangs uselessly against the unyielding glass of your helmet. You're sealed inside a spacesuit, impossibly far from home, gripping a power drill, and you can't see a blessed thing. This is where panic should take over, right? Where raw terror floods your system. But what if, instead of freaking out, you felt strangely, okay? What if you already had a plan ready to go? What if your training ran so deep that even going blind in the void of space was just another checkbox on your mental to-do list? This isn't some Hollywood thriller. This actually happened to Colonel Chris Hadfield, one of the most badass astronauts who ever lived. And here's the kicker. His calmness in that moment wasn't because he had nerves of steel. It was because he'd learned how to think differently. A complete mindset shift that started not among the stars, but right here on solid ground. Today we're exploring his remarkable book, An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth. Don't let the title fool you. This isn't just astronaut war stories. It's a playbook for building a better life, crushing your goals, and staying sane when the universe throws curveballs at your head. By the time we're done, you'll know the surprising mental tricks astronauts use to tame fear, master impossible skills, and pull off the extraordinary. You'll learn to think like someone who lives in space. And the best part? You can do it without ever leaving your couch. Our journey doesn't start in a rocket. It starts in a cramped living room on a tiny island in Ontario, Canada. The date is July 20th, 1969. A 9-year-old kid named Chris Hadfield is perched on the back of his neighbor's sofa, stretching to see a fuzzy black and white picture on the TV. On that screen, a man is deliberately placing his boot on the surface of the moon. The room explodes with joy. Adults are shaking hands like crazy. Kids are going absolutely wild. But for young Chris, this wasn't just history class come to life. It was an epiphany. The impossible had just become possible, broadcast live into his living room. That very night, staring up at the moon through his window, he knew exactly what he wanted to be. An astronaut, no question about it. Just one small hiccup. Astronauts were American. Canada didn't even have a space program yet. For a Canadian kid, wanting to be an astronaut was like wanting to sprout wings and fly to Mars. It was, by any reasonable standard, completely ridiculous. But Neil Armstrong hadn't let impossible stop him, and Chris Hadfield decided he wouldn't either. He made a quiet promise to himself that would shape everything that followed. Sure, he couldn't exactly enroll in astronaut school. It didn't exist for him, but he could start living like an astronaut right now. He asked himself one simple question. What would an astronaut do if he were 9 years old? Would an astronaut munch on potato chips or eat his vegetables? Would he sleep until noon or wake up early to read? He didn't broadcast his dream to the world. He just started making different choices. Every single day, he pointed his life toward a goal that was, honestly, pretty much a fantasy. This is the first powerful insight from Hadfield's story. Your attitude is the only thing you truly own. He figured out that even if space never happened, the process of becoming astronaut-worthy would make him sharper, stronger, better. The destination was a maybe, not a guarantee. He was obsessed with airplanes, so he joined the Air Cadets, Most Apollo astronauts had been test pilots, so he decided that's what he'd become. He knew science and engineering were non-negotiable, so he attacked his studies with fresh determination. He grew up working a corn farm, where hard work wasn't optional. It was just what happened after breakfast. When he snapped the drawbar on the tractor, his dad didn't fix it for him. He showed Chris how to weld it, then sent him right back to the field. When Chris broke it again the same day, he learned a brutal lesson about paying attention. This wasn't some joyless grind, though. He genuinely loved flying. He loved racing down ski slopes. But whenever he hit a fork in the road, his North Star was that impossible dream. He knew that bumming around the mountains for a few years, however awesome, wouldn't get him closer to space, so he picked the tougher path. His philosophy was beautifully simple. It probably won't happen, but I should keep moving in that direction anyway, just in case, and I should pick things I actually enjoy, so whatever happens, I'm good. He found genuine happiness in the preparation itself. Here's a life-changing secret. Don't obsess only about reaching the summit. Fall in love with the climb. Hadfield has this fantastic story about Elton John. There was an air show happening the same weekend as an Elton John concert nearby. Chris thought, what if, just what if, Elton somehow heard there was a guitar-playing astronaut at the show and invited him on stage. The odds were basically zero, but if it happened, what song would they play? Rocket Man, obviously. So Chris went home, learned Rocket Man backwards and forwards, and practiced until he could nail it. He never got that call to the stage. But he doesn't regret a single practice session. He says, that's pretty much how I approach everything. I spend my life getting ready to play Rocket Man. This preparation mindset leads to the second, and probably most surprising, lesson from astronaut training, the magic of negative thinking. Society constantly tells us to visualize success, think positive thoughts, believe you'll crush your goals. Astronauts do exactly the opposite. They spend years obsessively imagining everything that could go wrong. In the simulator, one of their most common questions is, okay, what's the next thing that's going to kill me? This isn't pessimism or morbid thinking. It's actually the most effective way to demolish fear. Hadfield explains that fear comes from uncertainty and feeling powerless. When you feel helpless, everything becomes terrifying. So how do you stop feeling helpless? You face every possible disaster head-on. You study it, take it apart, and build a battle plan. Over and over and over. At NASA, this is standard operating procedure. They run contingency sims, though in reality they're basically death sims. In a conference room, a group including doctors, administrators, PR people, and even the astronaut whose death is being imagined, sit down and walk through nightmare scenarios. The exercise begins. Chris has been seriously injured in orbit. Then, minutes later, a trainer drops a green card with an update. We've just received confirmation from the station. Chris is dead. Immediately, the team springs into problem-solving mode. Not with tears, but with cold logistics. What happens to the body? There aren't body bags on the station. Do we put it in a storage locker? What about decomposition? Do we push it out into space? Then another green card. Someone just tweeted that there's been an accident on the ISS. Now the communications team has to scramble. Who tells his family? How? What if they're at the cottage without cell service? Weirdly, this process isn't depressing. It's actually kind of liberating. By walking through the worst-case scenario in excruciating detail, you strip away its power. You build real competence. And competence is your best defense against fear. Hadfield knew that if the absolute worst happened, there was a plan. His loved ones would be okay. This didn't make him feel doomed. It gave him peace of mind, so when those engines roared to life, he could focus on just one thing: staying alive. This training actually rewires your instincts. Instead of responding to danger with blind panic, astronauts learn to react with focused curiosity. He tells this great story about being jolted awake on the International Space Station by a screaming fire alarm. Fire in space is nightmare fuel. There's literally nowhere to escape to. His 9-year-old self would have grabbed an extinguisher and gone full action hero. But 21 years of training had replaced that instinct with a protocol: warn, gather, work. One astronaut calmly got on the radio to alert the Russian crew. Another checked the computer to see which smoke detector triggered. They gathered together, then started methodically working the problem. No yelling, no chaos. Turns out it was a false alarm, but when it went off again an hour later, they ran through the exact same calm, systematic process. They'd practiced this disaster so many times that the real thing felt like just another drill. This brings us to another crucial principle: sweat the small stuff. Everyone loves saying, don't sweat the small stuff. For an astronaut, that advice could kill you. In space, tiny overlooked details can be catastrophic. The Challenger disaster? A cracked O-ring. Columbia? A chunk of foam that broke loose. Little things matter enormously. Hadfield learned this the hard way during basic jet training. To become a fighter pilot, essential for becoming an astronaut, he needed to graduate at the top of his class. Then one day, he completely bombed an instrument check flight. He was sloppy, unprepared, constantly playing catch-up instead of staying ahead. The instructor's face was grim. A reride was a black mark that often started a death spiral out of the program. Hadfield sat there, burning with shame, as the instructor reviewed his record. His dream was evaporating before his eyes. But then the instructor looked up. "I see this is your first bad flight. I'm calling it a bad day. No reride." That moment of mercy transformed him. He realized he'd gotten cocky, thinking natural talent was enough. From that day forward, he completely overhauled his approach. At night, instead of just studying in his room, he'd go sit in the freezing, dark cockpit of the plane he'd fly the next day. He'd act out the entire flight from start to finish, flipping switches and running through checklists. He'd do it repeatedly, so when he climbed into the real plane with an instructor watching, it felt like his fourth flight, not his first. This obsession with details paid massive dividends years later, during that first spacewalk, the one where he went blind. After his vision finally cleared, Mission Control figured out what happened. Before the spacewalk, he'd wiped his helmet visor with anti-fog solution, basically dish soap, to prevent fogging. He hadn't wiped it off completely. A microscopic smear of leftover soap mixed with a floating water droplet and created that excruciating sting that nearly derailed the entire mission. A multi-million-dollar spacewalk almost failed because of a tiny soap residue. From that moment on, every astronaut became fanatical about cleaning their visors. Nothing is too small to matter. But what happens when you've prepared for everything, mastered every tiny detail, and finally reached your goal? What happens when you, a lifelong overachiever, suddenly find yourself at the absolute bottom of the ladder? This brings us to one of the most valuable lessons for ambitious people: aim to be a zero. When Hadfield finally achieved his dream and showed up at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, he wasn't welcomed as a conquering hero. He and his fellow newcomers weren't even called astronauts. They were ASCAN's astronaut candidates. In his words, they were plebes, nobodies. He went from being a top-tier test pilot to sharing desk space with John Young, a guy who'd walked on the actual moon. He felt, as he puts it, like a gnat. In any new environment, he realized, people see you one of three ways. You can be a -1, someone who actively creates problems and makes life harder. You can be a +1, a superstar who clearly adds value from day one. Or you can be a 0, someone who's competent and helpful but not trying to steal the spotlight. Everyone wants to be a +1 immediately, but trying to be a hero on day one is the fastest path to becoming a disaster. You don't yet know what you don't know. He shares this cringe-worthy story from grad school, where he helpfully dumped leftover dye down a drain, only to discover that drain was connected to a sensitive data collection system he'd just contaminated. He was trying to help, but he'd become a huge problem. So when he arrived at NASA, he aimed to be a 0. He kept his mouth shut and his eyes wide open. He watched, absorbed, learned. He looked for small, quiet ways to contribute without causing waves. During a simulator session with 2 veteran astronauts, he was mostly just observing when he noticed the commander reaching for the wrong button. Quietly, he said, "Hold on, that's not the right one." The commander corrected course, and the sim continued smoothly. No drama. But months later, that same commander praised Hadfield's attention to detail to the head of the Space Center. Shortly after, he got his first mission assignment. Aiming to be a 0 is how you earn the right to become a +1. It demands humility. It requires understanding that, no matter how talented you are, you're part of something bigger. This team-first mentality is what he calls expeditionary behavior. It's understanding that in extreme situations, your crewmates might as well be the last people on Earth. You don't have to be best friends, but you absolutely have to trust each other with your lives. He learned this not just in space, but during grueling survival training on Earth. He describes one expedition in the frozen wilderness of Quebec, where the team had to drag a 300-pound sled through deep snow for 2 solid weeks. It was exhausting, soul-crushing work. In that situation, you can either wallow in misery and drag everyone down, or you can focus on what's best for the group. Complaining, he'd learned from his dad on the farm, spreads like wildfire and destroys morale. Instead, he looked for ways to lift spirits. Someone carved a face into a pineapple and named it Wilson, like the volleyball from Castaway. Hadfield started a game where each person shared their engagement story. Simple distraction, but it built connection and made dragging that brutal sled slightly more bearable. This mindset extends to the tiniest acts of consideration. During his long stay on the ISS, he had the brilliant idea to trim his fingernails over an air intake vent, figuring the suction would catch all the clippings. It worked perfectly. Until the weekend, when the station commander, Kevin Ford, opened that vent for routine cleaning and got a face full of Hadfield's dead fingernails. Kevin politely mentioned it later. Hadfield was mortified. It was a minor mistake. But a series of thoughtless acts like that can poison team dynamics. When you're stuck in a tin can together for months, every small action ripples outward. Ultimately, thinking like an astronaut is a complete life philosophy. It's about approaching impossible goals with patient, step-by-step determination. It's about destroying fear by preparing for failure. It's about understanding that excellence lives in the details. And it's about having the humility to aim for 0, and the wisdom to recognize that the people around you are your greatest asset. As Chris Hadfield prepared for his final mission, a 5-month stint on the ISS where he'd become the first Canadian commander, he was no longer that square peg trying to force his way into a round hole. 21 years of relentless preparation, of embracing humility, of learning from mistakes, had reshaped him completely. He'd transformed himself into an astronaut. But the most incredible discovery wasn't learning how to survive in space. It was finding a better way to live right here on Earth. When you close a book like An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, there's this lingering sense of wonder. Not just about the spectacular achievements of space exploration, but about the deeply practical wisdom Chris Hadfield brought home with him. The most transformative lesson, in my view, is how he completely reframes our relationship with fear and achievement. Our culture constantly pushes us to chase success, visualize victory, and never think about failure. Hadfield turns this upside down. He shows us that genuine confidence doesn't come from pretending risks don't exist. It comes from studying them so thoroughly, so relentlessly, that they lose their grip on you. This power of negative thinking isn't about being gloomy. It's about being prepared. It's about building unshakable competence. Think about something that scares you right now. Maybe it's a presentation, a tough conversation, or launching a new project. The fear comes from the unknown, right? By using Hadfield's approach, you can start diffusing that fear. Don't just practice your presentation. Imagine the projector dying. Imagine going blank mid-sentence. Imagine someone asking a hostile question. What would you do? By having contingency plans for these scenarios, you build a quiet, powerful confidence. You're not just hoping things go well. You're ready for things to go sideways, and that makes you unshakable. The other concept that really sticks with me is aiming to be a zero. In a culture that constantly screams at us to stand out, disrupt, be extraordinary from minute one, this is such refreshing wisdom. It's a call for genuine humility. It reminds us that real value isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the most useful. By focusing on learning, observing, and helping with the unglamorous work, you build credibility and trust. You earn your place, and often, you naturally become a +1 without ever having to announce it. So how can you start thinking like an astronaut today? Here are some concrete steps. First, embrace negative visualization. Pick one significant goal for the coming month. Instead of only imagining success, spend 10 minutes listing everything that could go wrong. For each potential problem, write down 1 or 2 ways to prevent it or handle it if it happens. You'll be surprised how much more confident you feel. Second, in your next new situation, whether it's a new job, joining a team, or starting a class, consciously aim to be a 0. For the first week or 2, make your only goal to learn people's names, understand how things work, and find small ways to be helpful. Ask questions instead of sharing opinions. Listen twice as much as you talk. And finally, sweat the small stuff. Before your next big challenge, do what Hadfield did in that cold airplane hangar. Sit down and mentally rehearse every single step. Visualize the mundane details. The more thoroughly you prepare for the ordinary, the more gracefully you'll handle the extraordinary. An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth isn't just a memoir. It's a masterclass in living with intention, grace, and competence. It shows us that remarkable achievements are built on a foundation of countless, small, deliberate actions, and that the greatest adventures often teach us the most about everyday life. That was a summary of An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth by Chris Hadfield. We've explored the big ideas today, but I need to be honest with you. A summary is like looking at a photograph of the Grand Canyon. It gives you the shape and outline, but it can never capture what it feels like to stand at the edge and feel that vast space opening before you. The real power of this book is in those quiet moments when one of Hadfield's stories connects perfectly with something you're wrestling with in your own life. This summary is here to help you decide if this is a book worth your time. If anything we've talked about sparked something in you, I genuinely encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about collecting information. It's an experience that can honestly shift how you see your own possibilities. The link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this valuable, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps us know we're creating something worthwhile, and make sure you don't miss our next deep dive into another transformative book. Let's keep learning and growing together.